Hello guys, how are you doing? I thought today we were going to have a species special, talking about fun facts about species. So, let's go. Fun fact number 1. There are around 37 Hawaiian cricket species spread around the 4 biggest islands in the Hawaii. And the thing is, in nature, they don't interbreed. That's why they're split into 37 species. They do not cross over. But if you put them in the lab and you make them breed, they have viable offspring that can then have their own offspring, and there's absolutely no physical impediment or DNA issue that prevents them from having offspring. So they simply don't want to interbreed in nature, but they physically are able to. Fun fact number 2. Everyone's heard of Hercules the liger, who has a tiger mother and a lion father. And mules and all sorts of examples of different species being able to have offspring. But what most people miss out is that the current definition of species involves breeding between different things that not only successfully have offspring, but have viable offspring, which means that they have offspring that can then have their own offspring. And of course, Hercules the liger, or mules can't have their own offspring. So that's the difference. Fun fact number 3. Why can certain things not interbreed? A lot of people are very confused about that. It's not obvious. Like, what is the difference? And the thing is, there are many different outcomes of these differences and many differences that result in either conception itself not happening, or before birth not happening, or after birth not happening, or indeed they have offspring but the offspring can't reproduce. So there are various points along this timeline where things don't work out. And one of the reasons for that is, for example, ploidine DNA, the number of chromosomes that you have, the sets of chromosomes that you have, and sometimes it just doesn't add up. If you end up with 5 chromosomes, then how are you going to split 5 chromosomes? How are you going to split 17 chromosomes? It's just kind of logistics, more or less. Fun fact number 4. Our perception of the very concept of species weighs very heavily on how we think about species, how we determine species. For example, at the very beginning, scientists categorized species from what they had, which at the time was simply, what they look like, how they behave, what they do, and sort of obvious superficial things like that, which of course from one point of view seems kind of obvious to do, and from another point of view seems totally counterintuitive to do. And of course now we know that that's not necessarily the case, and a lot of things that look like they should be related are actually not at all related. Now, to make things more complicated, even now where we use DNA comparisons to figure out how closely related things are to one another, even now it's not clear-cut, because nature does not have an inherent way of splitting things where there are clear thresholds of how much difference is enough of a difference to split things into 2 rather than keep them as 1. And it's arbitrary for scientists to decide where they draw the line and how much of a difference is enough of a difference. Fun fact number 5, and I think this is where things get especially interesting, is where you think of a monophyletic tree. If you think of a lot of species that all have, how do I put this? So think of a vertical tree where you have a species that gave rise to another species, that gave rise to another species, that gave rise to another species. And of course, if you zoom in to those species, you have individuals having children who have children who have children. And of course, if you look at the tree, there are many different species. But if you think of the reality of the situation, which is children having children, having children, having children, having children, you're suggesting that there is a continuum, or maybe not a continuum, where a parent had a child who was a different species. And of course this feeds into the previous video about your grandma being a fish, which is what Dawkins pointed to. If you went back long enough in time to your direct ancestors, right above you, right above your grandma, great grandma, whatever, one of them would be a fish, you know? They would be unrecognizable to you. And isn't it counterintuitive to be thinking that a parent would have a child that is a different species to themselves? Because if that's never the case, then you can never have two different species. It's an abstraction to split them up. In reality, you can't split them up into species. The very definition of species revolves around the concept of successful reproduction, and you'd think there is no greater example of that than a parent having a child. So how on earth could they be even insinuated to be part of different species or different anything? That is a huge contradiction, and we're going to explore that much deeper and further in the upcoming Outrage of the Month number 10. So stay tuned for that, and bye.